Every year, around 2 billion shots of this vodka get poured worldwide, from Moscow to Miami, from Tokyo to Lagos. The label is bold red. The font looks almost Russian, and the name, unmistakably Slavic. But here's the part they never put on the bottle. This isn't a Russian product. It never really was. And the company that owns it today has been caught bribing government officials, shifting profits through offshore accounts, and faking a cultural identity to sell you a lie. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a British corporation turned a dead man's heritage into one of the most profitable deception machines in modern business history. And you'll never look at that red label the same way again. Let's go back, way back, because to understand the trick, you need to understand what they stole. Moscow, a former serf, meaning a peasant who had legally been owned by a landowner, starts a small vodka distillery. His name is Pyotr Smirnov. He had no money, no connections, and no safety net. But he had one thing, a better product. He figured out that running vodka through layers of charcoal before bottling it made it cleaner, smoother, and less harsh on the throat. Sounds basic, but in 1864, that was genuinely revolutionary. Within 20 years, his distillery controlled roughly 2/3 of the Moscow vodka market, and in 1886, the Russian Imperial Court officially named Smirnov vodka the supplier to the Tsar himself. That seal of approval wasn't just symbolic. It was the 19th century equivalent of going viral. Sales exploded. But here's the first crack in the fairy tale. The Russian government, desperate for revenue, nationalized the entire vodka industry. Pyotr's son, Vladimir, was forced to hand over the distillery. Then, in 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution swept through Russia. Private enterprise was abolished overnight. Vladimir fled the country with nothing but a memory and a recipe. He tried Istanbul, too unstable. He tried Lviv, then Poland, too small a market. He tried Paris, better, but still barely surviving. By the late 1920s, the once imperial Smirnov brand was a ghost, an idea kept alive by one exiled man in a European apartment. And then someone bought that ghost. Not the product, the name. A man named Rudolf Kunet, whose family had once sold grain to the original Moscow distillery, struck a licensing deal with Vladimir in 1933. Just as Prohibition ended in the United States, he set up a small production facility in Connecticut and started bottling vodka under the slightly westernized spelling, Smirnoff. The idea was bold. The execution was a disaster. Americans had never heard of vodka. Those who had thought it was some kind of industrial cleaner. By 1938, Kunet was nearly bankrupt. He sold the rights to a company called Heublein for just $14,000. $14,000 for what would become one of the most valuable alcohol brands on earth? Now this is where the story gets dark, because what Heublein bought wasn't just a brand. They bought a blank canvas, and what they painted on it was a lie they've been selling ever since. Heublein's marketing team made a decision that seems almost absurd in hindsight. They doubled down on the Russian identity, not because the product had any real Russian connection anymore. It was being made in Connecticut by Americans, but because the Russian image sold. The word Smirnoff, the Cyrillic-style font, the red branding evoking Soviet posters. They built the entire global identity of this product on a country that had already erased it decades earlier. And it worked brilliantly, disgustingly well. They created the Moscow Mule, a cocktail with zero connection to Moscow, to make the unfamiliar feel fun and accessible. They ran a campaign calling it white whiskey, specifically to trick whiskey drinkers into trying it, technically mislabeling an alcohol product. But nobody stopped them. By the 1960s, Smirnoff was the best-selling spirits brand in the United States. Open loop coming, because here's what no one talks about. In actual Russia, Smirnoff is basically unknown. Russians drink Stolichnaya. They drink Russian Standard. They drink homemade stuff. Smirnoff, the world's most Russian vodka, is so un-Russian that it holds essentially zero market share in Russia itself. That detail alone tells you everything you need to know about how this brand operates. Now, 1997. This is where the corporate machine enters. A British company called Diageo is formed through the merger of Guinness and Grand Metropolitan, with a combined market value that instantly made it one of the largest alcohol corporations in the world. They absorbed Smirnoff. They didn't change the recipe. They didn't change the branding. They didn't change the fake Russian narrative. What they changed was the scale. Diageo pushed Smirnoff into 130 countries, locked it into hotel chains, airport lounges, and supermarket shelves globally. They kept the red label, kept the Cyrillic style font, kept the Moscow branding, because why fix the lie when the lie is making you billions? And here is where it stops being just a clever marketing story and starts being something more uncomfortable. In 2011, Diageo paid over $16 million to settle U.S. federal charges that it had bribed government officials across multiple countries, including Korea, India, and Thailand, to gain sales advantages for its brands. This wasn't a rogue employee. This was a systemic practice run through subsidiaries over years. More than $1.7 million in improper payments to hundreds of Indian government officials alone, generating $11 million in extra profits. The U.S. Department of Justice called it a violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Diageo wrote the check and moved on. They also moved their profits. Literally. In 2017, the UK tax authority, HMRC, ordered Diageo to pay £107 million after investigating how the company had shifted profits between the UK and the Netherlands to reduce its tax bill. The scheme was later tied to a broader European Commission investigation into what regulators called an illegal state aid advantage. Essentially, Diageo and other multinationals had used a UK tax loophole that gave them an unfair advantage over smaller competitors who actually paid their taxes. Diageo calculated its potential total liability from that ruling at around £277 million. It fought the case and largely escaped. Let that sink in. A company that sells you a product built on a false national identity has also been caught bribing officials on multiple continents and engineering its corporate structure to avoid paying hundreds of millions in taxes. And yet the red label keeps selling. The Moscow Mule keeps getting ordered, and the story stays the same. Here is the uncomfortable truth. They're not selling vodka. They're selling a feeling. The feeling of something exotic, something authentic, something with history behind it. And that feeling is completely manufactured. The history was stripped away in 1904 when the Tsar nationalized the distillery. The authenticity died when it moved to Connecticut in 1933. And the Russianness was never more than a graphic design decision made in an American marketing office. The Smirnoff story is a masterclass in what economists call identity laundering. Take a real heritage, divorce it from its origin, brand the identity back onto a product that has no actual connection to it, and scale that fiction globally. It's not illegal to imply Russian origin through design choices. There's no law against Cyrillic-style fonts on a British product made in Illinois, and that legal gray zone is exactly where the money lives. Because here's the final twist. The people who actually carry the Smirnoff name, the descendants of the original Russian Smirnov family, tried to fight back. In 1995, a group calling itself the Joint Stock Society, or Heirs of Smirnoff, official purveyor to the Imperial Court, filed a federal lawsuit in the United States. They argued that Diageo had stolen their name. A federal judge dismissed the case in 1999. Diageo had held a valid U.S. trademark since 1934. The actual Russian family, with the actual historical claim to the name, walked away with nothing. The British corporation, with the lawyers and the lobbyists and the offshore accounts, kept everything. So the next time you see that red label on the bar, ask yourself, what exactly are you paying for? Not Russian craftsmanship, not imperial heritage. You're paying for one of the most well-executed corporate fictions in the history of consumer brands. A fiction built on a dead man's legacy, sold by a British conglomerate, made in factories from Illinois to India, and defended in court by a legal team that will never run out of money. The most Russian vodka in the world hasn't been Russian for over a century, and the company that owns it has been caught bribing, tax shifting, and lying, and still turned a pre-tax profit of 4.7 billion pounds in a single year. Maybe the scariest part isn't that they built the lie, it's that we keep buying it. If you want to understand how another global brand runs the same playbook, corporate fraud, dressed up as a beloved product, the next video is right there. Watch it, and then decide if the brands you trust deserve that trust.